Welcome back, everybody, to the ATL Baseball Podcast. This is episode 16. I'm your host, Michael Shepard. I'm joined today by Director of Youth Baseball and founder of Youth Academy at Driveline, Deven Morgan. He just, would you call it produced his own book?
Yeah, I mean, sure. We wrote it. I did a lot of photography for it, and I was basically the project manager to help turn, a gigantic Google document into like a book that you can hold in your hands. So, but it wasn't only me. Certainly, a ton of help from my team at Driveline, um, Kate Johnson, Nick Chapa, Emily Coolbaugh, Astrid, Chloe. Like it definitely wasn't like a single person thing, but it was my baby, So like I had to make sure that the baby got born the right way.
Going through the what I could see on Twitter and or X now and all of that, I used the word produced because it's not like a book that is just written out. It looked like it was, like you said, many different people that came together, a lot of different smart minds, a lot of different data, with pictures and things to go along with the words. So I used the word produced, even though you'd consider a book written. So that's called Skills That Scale. That's available now. You can buy it. Where can you get it?
You can get it at drivelinebaseball.com. And the only thing that I kind of try to couch people on now is it's kind of more than just a book because the reason we called it a training manual is because all the resources that come with it. So if you want to jump in and just learn everything that we have about, I think, how to be a better youth baseball coach, a more effective youth baseball coach, and how to develop skill with a very specific objective of like creating more competent 90-foot baseball players. There's the book, but we also have all like the what to do as well. So it's a yearly training plan, micro schedules, like weekly training schedules, macro schedules, like a 6-week block, 6-week practice plans, games, hitting videos, throwing videos, defensive stuff, catching stuff. Like we try to put a whole bunch of stuff all in one place. So like it is a book that you can buy and it's pretty large, but it's also like the online component as well. That kind of comes with it to make sure that, whether it's moms or dads or coaches that are buying it, that they not only understand what we're trying to do, but understand how to do it at a really, really high level.
So what I really want to start off today with is on your Twitter, July 27th, 2018. You have a pinned tweet. It's a video.
Oh boy.
It's a video of you throwing side toss to your son,
Yep.
and you say side toss won't transfer. Moments with my
Yeah.
son will transfer. Care more about the latter and less about the former. Let them love the game. The rest is out of your hands. Talk to me about the importance of that tweet, and because I know where you're going with that, and I know where you're coming from, and I think being in youth baseball, we notice a lot that's lost, and as coaches, we see when the love of the game is taken away from kids. So, talk to me about that tweet and what it matters, or why it matters, or what it means to you.
Sure. Um, so at the time, this is 2018, so it feels like about 2 decades ago. Uh, there was this whole conversation on baseball Twitter, in so much as that's a thing, about transfer of training, right? I mean, that's the general conversation was about. Well, you shouldn't spend a lot of time doing like side soft toss because that's not going to transfer. And and I saw, I think, a lot of youth coaches, and again, coaches know better or worse than me. They're just like dads that are trying to figure this thing out, trying to wade through, I think, the truth of that and how that would apply to training their own kids. Um, and that summer, I had just, my son and I, as per usual, he wanted to hit, and we had a, big backyard, so we just kind of set things up, and it was hot out. It was really hot that day, and I mean, this is Northwest hot, right? This isn't like Arizona hot. So it's not, we're talking about not like a buck 20 in the shade. But it was like, it was upper 90s or whatever. I'd have to go back. I'm sure like the Farmer's Almanac would tell me how hot it was actually that day. Uh, so we were just hitting, and he was getting tired and hot. And so there's a longer version of that video where I'm talking to him between reps. And the conversation kind of went in an interesting way where I was just kind of trying to like talk him through the thing that I think I've learned about the game, which is at the most fundamental level, like it's hard and it gets harder.
Hmm.
Like there's no, I mean, I'm sure that, we can look at performances like, like Juan Soto or a Bryce Harper or a Garrett Cole or whoever, like at this really ultra elite level, and you see those guys get really good outcomes, and it seems like everything's just too easy. Like when I think about, I don't know, probably the most dominant pitchers I've ever seen in my life, like, your Randy Johnsons or your Pedro Martinez's of the world, right? When they're going good, it just everything seems really easy. Um, but I think that the closer that I've gotten through Driveline to what it actually looks like for the work that these guys put in to have that type of outcome where it looks really, really easy, it's like you only get to that point when you work really, really hard. And that moment in the sun that you're going to have, pun kind of intended, when it does look really easy, is only going to be a brief window of time, right? I mean,
Hmm.
and that's our game, right? And I think to a degree, that's I think the thing that attracts psychopaths like us to it is that you love it because it's hard, which is a challenging thing I think for kids to wrap their brains around. So, between reps, I was just doing side soft, was kind of talking to him about this idea that like you got to work hard because you love it, and and that work is not going to mean that you're always like best prepared to go out and do your best. Like I literally was walking out of the facility last night, and one of my coaches was talking to one of my kids who's having a bad day, not my biological kids, but like
Hmm.
my kids in the academy. And what I heard him say that made my heart so very happy is um, he said, well, if all you can give me is 60% today, then I need you to give me the most of that 60%.
Wow.
And Alexander Combs, shout out to my coach. And the way that, like the point that Combsy was kind of making last night to one of our 15-year-old kids, I suppose is the same point that I was making to my very young son at that point, which is just that if all you do in your game, in this game, is like really do your best on a day by day basis, regardless of what that means, then you should be satisfied. And ultimately, like that's what I think this thing should be about is kids being satisfied with their effort and parents and coaches actively rewarding that. Um, so when I kind of was like I had shot that video when we had hit out in the sun, um, and then I saw that conversation about transfer of training, I was just like, I think trying to highlight the fact that I think we're missing the forest for the trees. If you get hyper fixated on the degree to which some specific modality of training directly transfers or not, or how technically correct a child moves relative to the expectation that you have for them, I think as a parent, because again, it's youth baseball, and an inordinate amount of us are literally coaching our own kids, right? It's the one level of our sport where there's a pretty high odds that like the coach has a direct biological relationship to the one of the kids on the field. That's not true in high school baseball. That's not true in college baseball, and it's certainly not true in professional baseball. Um, I think, and I'm only saying this because I've done it, right? I've been too obsessive about like this technical concept, whether that's transfer of training, mechanics, yada yada, and I over indexed for that, and I under indexed for how special these moments are that I get to have with my child. Um, because at the end of the day, I'm going to be his parent for a lot longer. He's going to be an athlete. Like that's just and look, my kid years and years ago was like, well, I'm gonna play when he was like 6 or 7. He's like, I'm gonna play, Major League Baseball until I'm like 50. And then I'll go work at like the frozen yogurt stand. And then after that, then I think I'll be an astronaut. Like when he was really tiny, like that was his career progression. And regardless of whether or not he plays high school ball or college ball or something, anything beyond that, best case scenario, I'm going to be his parent for a lot longer than he's going to be an athlete. And if I keep that perspective, I think it helps me be a better baseball coach, but I think it also helps me develop a better relationship with my child through the game, you know?
That Honestly, it gets me a little. What you said, I'm gonna be his parent a lot longer than he's gonna be an athlete. Gets me emotional thinking like back. I was like 12 years old, and I was on a traveling team. My dad was one of the. He was always my coach up until I was 14, I think. And that year we had. It was before travel baseball was big, but we had two teams in the city. It was like my dad's team and this other guy's team. We finally combined because we said why are we splitting the little talent that we have into two? And the other team, they were all inner city, but like they were just a lot more like raw, like hoot and holler and rah rah, all that, and we weren't. And I joined this team, and we were playing all summer, and it was going horribly. Like we were just awful. And one of the kids, whose dad was the coach, his dad came out to sub him, and he said, "Hey son, you're going to play here, wherever." And the kid's like, "No, I'm not going there. I'm not going there." And like nothing happened. The dad didn't do anything about it. Whatever. So an inning later, my dad came out to make a change, and he goes, "Chep, you're going to catch." It's like I'm not catching, Dad. So we go home that night. The look in his eyes, just like I knew I was in trouble. So we go
Sure.
home. We get home, and he says, "Put all your baseball stuff in this garbage bag." And I'm like screaming and crying, Put it in there. He's like, "You're done with baseball." He says, "If that's how you're gonna act, we're not playing on this team, and this is not this team's fault. This is your decision, whatever." So then, like a week later, I think I'm done with baseball forever. And my dad comes to me and he says, sits me down and goes, "I want to have a talk with you." It's like, "All right, what do you got?" He probably didn't say, "What do you got?" I just crossed
Sure.
my arms. I was so pouty. And he was like, "I thought long and hard before I even pulled you off that team about your attitude and how it's been." I was just miserable. Like I was a little turd. And he was like, "My dad, which my grandpa," he goes,
Yep.
I talked to your grandpa Pops, and I really didn't have a relationship with his dad. He was like a recovering drug addict, in and out, like And he goes, "I want you to remember something." I talked to him, and he asked me this question. He said, "Mike," he goes, "are you raising a young man or are you raising a baseball player?" And he goes, "I'm raising a young man." And he's like, "That's why I pulled you off that team." And it's like, it just gets me emotional to think about that, and the times with my dad and mom after
Yep.
games, going to get ice cream. Like when you're really young and you don't really understand why you're doing what you're doing, and you're just going out there because you like to play, and you remember the times with your parents after the games. And I don't know if you guys see it a ton of where you're at, but you see a lot of dads out there that are just, they look like to me they're sucking the fun out of the game for their kid.
Oh, we see it here. Yep.
And surely I know if you ask dads, they don't mean to do that, but dads get caught up too, you know, and they forget why we're doing it. It's almost like they're living through their son's eyes, or daughter, obviously. Um, and I think that's why I wanted to ask you about that tweet today, because I think when you boil it down to data, not data, ground balls, fly balls, strikeouts are good, strikeouts are bad. Have fun. Like, how do we get kids better, but keep it fun? Because if they don't love the game, they're never going to reach their full potential.
Correct.
So, I mean, that's what I wanted to start off with today, and I think you hit the nail on the head with that, because so many different reasons. We just we if we keep that in mind and at the forefront, I think we'll be okay as coaches and
Well,
parents.
Yeah, I think the look, man, if I talk about anything that I think I believe should be improved in youth baseball or improved in coaches and improved the way that parents interact with their own children and other kids in baseball, it's probably only because I screwed it up. Like I've been that guy that's got it wrong before. I have been that guy who put an inordinate amount of pressure on my own kids in the game, not because I was trying to go out and be a jerk. Like I wasn't I wasn't intentionally trying to do anything different than I am now. The issue is just like I didn't have the right perspective to inform how I should go about doing that.
You didn't know any better.
I didn't know any better. I was a younger parent, and I suffered all of those flaws that like I think young parents can, which is really no fault of their own. It's just you don't have enough perspective, right? You don't have enough time under tension to kind of understand what this story looks like in the long term, how it unfolds. Like I remember, one of the worst moments that I ever had as a coach is that my son was probably 8 or 9, and he was playing up, a year or two or whatever because he was not bad. Um, and we had a game over on the west side of where we are here at this really really nice field that like looks over the water. Like it's beautiful beautiful location. Terrible batter's eye, like absolute terrible batter's eye, but like great great place to play a game, right? And my kid comes up and takes a strikeout on 3 pitches that were like not really close to the zone, but it's like first year kid pitch, and the umpires are trying to keep the game moving.
Right.
And he had like a little bit of an emotional moment, and I was like, hey man, like can't have that, and then he goes up again, takes another strikeout, which like was he's frustrated because he didn't strike out a lot, right? And he got rung up on something that again was like kind of in the other batter's box a little bit. And he comes off and he's like slamming the bat and slamming the helmet and doing all the things that 8-year-olds would do, kind of regardless of baseball or not, when they are met with something that they perceive to be unfair or unjust, and like they literally can't like wrap their brains around it, right? So he has this big emotional meltdown, and I responded in kind. The way that that I was reacting to him was not, hey son, let me calmly sit you down and like talk through why we can't have this reaction and how we need to do a better job of controlling our emotions. We need to come up with like some practical ways that we can do that, et cetera, et cetera. I'm yelling at him because I'm embarrassed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's, again, he's like my best hitter on the team. So if he's not getting knocked and like we're not going to win this game. And in the whole thing just like turned into him having an emotional reaction and me being upset by that reaction, and my reaction was an emotional reaction which then compels him to have a more significant emotional reaction.
Yeah.
And it's
Just
just
a
like this
snowball,
giant,
man.
yeah man, it's a snowball rolling downhill. And then like I'm surprised when it crashes into the village and like crushes the whole town. And and I have to acknowledge the fact that as his parent, I can desire for him to react differently to situations like that, but like ultimately, I have to coach him through them, right? Like that's the thing in life. And again, not to, I feel like I'm getting like super hippy dippy right off the jump. So, um, whatever, we're gonna roll with it. I saw this video from like Nick Saban and Bill Belichick the other day, and they were talking about when Kobe Bryant visited both of their teams when they were coaching. And the thing that Saban says that he leads off with is he said, Kobe Bryant came to our team and he said, I know I'm not going to be perfect, but the reason that I work so hard is that like every rep that I put in, I'm getting like closer and closer and closer to perfection.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw that on Instagram and I sent it to my son, and I was like, man, the thing that you really need to wrap your brain around is that like that's Kobe Bryant telling you that he is tacitly aware that he's not going to be perfect. The thing that I've seen over and over as a youth baseball coach is young kids who want to be good at like a very deep emotional level because they have a child's emotional association to the game. Whether they really want to be really good, whether they really love playing, it's this it's this very like a child's emotional attachment to the game is like the place where they get a chance to be themselves the most. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about other people's kids behind closed doors, but like I'm not my kid, I think, is his most fully resolved version of himself currently on a baseball field. That's where he's comfortable. That's where he wants to be. As his parent, I've tried to serve that because I know that he's only going to be able to play for so long.
Mm-hmm.
So from that perspective, I think there's a couple things. Number one, I had to kind of come to terms with the fact that there was some of my behavior as his coach and parent that I needed to change because otherwise I was going to like extinguish that fire for him, right?
Mm-hmm.
Know that the game is hard, it's only going to get harder. And if I was putting additional pressure on him more than the pressure he was putting on himself, um, especially pressure that really doesn't exist because none of these consequences in youth baseball truly matter other than ones that are going to lead to a kid going, I don't want to do this anymore, and actually choosing for themselves to be done rather than the thing that we want, that we kind of actually want longer term, which is you play the game long enough to the point that somebody says you can't play anymore.
Right.
Like I want kids to get to that point because I think if that's really what it is, then you get a chance to have like a very honest assessment of, hey man, like I got the most out of this that I could,
Mm-hmm.
and I got as close as possible to the truth of how good I could possibly be. That's all I want. But then beyond that, if we want this thing to be meaningful, then you need to extract something from it that's going to inform your perspective about how you approach the rest of your life. Like, best case scenario, you play this game until let's say your late 20s. Like, hey man, you played longer than 99.999% of the population.
Yeah.
You're also going to live for another like 60 years. So what do you extract from this experience that's going to inform the way that you approach the rest of your life? And the thing that I've written about in the book and the thing that, kind of inform my perspective is I think people that play baseball long enough cultivate this like very specific sense of resilience that our game can teach because it's so difficult, right? Like that's the thing because the game is so hard, you have to cultivate this perspective of like it's the thing that we talk about as coaches that we want for our kids, right? You need to have a short memory, right? Like you need to have a short memory, need to be able to turn the page. Well, why? Why is that true? It's true because you know that you're going to fail, right? Like you know that you're going to fail. But it's not that that failure is definitive. That failure is just what happened in that moment. And all we want as baseball players and baseball coaches is the kids to be able to turn that page so that in the next opportunity they can set themselves to compete as best as possible. Like you just want to continue working so that you work and fail and work and fail and work and fail. And if that signal is good and accurate, then you start turning some of those failures into successes, right? And then, ideally you just press as long as you can to get as good as you possibly can at something. I think there's a baseball specific application of that perspective. I think that there is a dentist's application of that perspective. I think that there is an architect's perspective, right? I think that's learning, and I think that that's life, and I think our game can teach it in a very specific manner. But if you get run out of the game way too early, and to me that's before 90-foot baseball, before you get a chance to put on spikes. If you get run out of the game too early, either because you can't put context to these experiences when you inevitably struggle, because it's hard to be perfect in our game, or when you have a parent or a coach that doubles down on those same consequences because from a good intention, like I want my kids to be successful. There's nothing wrong with that, with the impetus, right? It's just kind of the method that you go about executing it that becomes at odds because and again, I've been that guy who lost a youth baseball game and then went like fully Augie Garrido for 25 minutes in left field with my team of like 9 through 11 year olds. I've, I'm only talking about it because I've done it.
Mm-hmm.
And was I right about the things that I was trying to coach them on? Yes. Is the delivery method that I tried to give it to children correct for them? Absolutely not. Right? But like but I'm coaching, I'm coaching the way that I was coached, right? When I was playing baseball in the early 80s to or I guess the early 80s into like the early 90s, our coaches back then were hard men because they were coached by hard men. Doesn't necessarily, but I know more, like we've just learned a little bit now. I try to parent differently than my parents parented me versus the way that they were parented by their parents. I think that there's an application of that in terms of coaching effectiveness that you could bring to baseball, but it requires some perspective. And it's certainly perspective that as a young coach, I just didn't have.
I think you're correct when you say like I don't think anyone has bad intentions, especially coaches. It's like when the kid is out there and he can't throw a strike, and then you have some of the coaches that are just like screaming, throw a strike. And I always tell like my guys, even at like 17, 16 and 17U, which are the two age levels that I coach in our organization, is like, if I ever scream at you, like throw strikes, I want you to come right off the field and be like, yo, I'm not trying to throw balls, dumbass.
Right.
Like,
Right.
and the like parents aren't trying to take away the love of the game from their kids. It's hard in that moment. Like you said, you're a parent has the competitive fire and wants to win and wants their team to succeed, and you just haven't dealt with that with kids. Like you don't know how to
Right.
do that. But like when every little league has like the older veteran coach that doesn't have any kids there, and normally
Yeah.
they're the best ones because they've just
They're the
been
most
around the
built.
game that
Yep.
that age way more than everyone else has, so they know how to deal with that. But then you see the young dad who's decked out in Lululemon, just came from the gym because his metabolism's still high, looks good. He's the one
Yeah.
that's usually yelling and screaming. And like you said a little bit ago, we were going down a path of, what did you say? Hippie. What word did you use? Basically, we're talking about like non developing skills and all that. Like I I think your perspective and having people hear your perspective is so important, because and the reasoning behind developing a book, right? Like anybody that's not coached at the youth level can develop and produce a book that's accurate with stats and stuff. But I think when you're trying to sell that to people, and we're not trying, this is not a podcast strictly to so you can sell books, right? Like that's not what we're trying to do here. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I think parents hearing your reasoning behind it and your thought process and your that you've been out there and you have failed and you have been screaming at kids while they're picking their boogers and throwing dandelions and everything else. I think that's so important for them to hear, because they know that this guy's been through it. This book isn't just like developing a robot. This is how you should do it. If you want your kid to have a sustained launch angle of 12.5 for his career, this is how you
Sure.
do it. Like it's not about just that. There's so many different layers to the book of like dynamic warm up. Like you have a whole chapter in dynamic warm up. I can't get my 17-year-old, 16-year-old teams to go out and spend more than 15 minutes in left field, and that is including dynamic warm up and throwing. I'm like, guys, it's 15 minutes. You should be just dynamicing alone for 15 minutes. What are we? How are we stretched and thrown for 15 minutes? And now we're back in 15 minutes. Like,
Yeah.
you know, um,
Yeah. I think the thing for parents is just like it's hard to criminalize young parents because they just don't have the experience yet. And like, look, man, my kids are teenagers now. I got a 17 and a 15. I'm sure that my perspective 5 years from now, let alone 10, is going to be way different than it is now, because I'm going to have learned more, and I'm going to learn more about the things that I got wrong, and maybe one or two things that I got right. But younger parents, man, I understand it, but I think I also understand that it can be different. And, the whole point of like writing the book is to try to impart some of that perspective on parents and coaches that might not yet have time under tension to learn it. And
Let
like the best example of that right now is we did a clip on our podcast last year about an 8U a screenshot from Game Changer of an 8U game where not only they're keeping score, and like we're keeping score at 8, like come on, but but a kid's getting intentionally walked.
no.
Yeah, and
Stop it.
yeah, no, this is a real thing that happened. And what I said, so I think I actually did this and talked about it as like a solo podcast, just like full Bill Burr style, right? And the thing I was saying in this clip that we posted in our socials is just like, wrap your head around the idea that wins and losses at the 8U level portend nothing for your child's baseball future. Like it literally, you could win all the games at 8U, and it doesn't make it more likely that your kid's going to be on a high school baseball team. You could lose all the games at 8, and the same is also true. Um, and the thing that I was trying to advocate for is that like if that's true, then it sucks for the kids if we are over optimizing for the competition result at the expense of providing kids learning opportunities. And giving a kid the freedom to try to hit and try to produce something is a learning opportunity. I understand the strategy of walking kids at the 8U level. Like I understand it. I understand what we're trying to do. I understand an intentional walk at the 8U level from a strategic standpoint, right? If I'm facing a team and there's like one kid out of 9 that can actually find a barrel, I put that kid on, and like I think it's just more likely that my pitcher could float in 3 strikes and this next kid's not going to find one. Yeah, I
Of course.
I understand the strategy. But to me, if we're putting strategy optimization for win games that nobody gives a crap about ahead of learning opportunities, then we have failed, right? So we did that clip last year. Now, since the book is out, my marketing team at Driveline has put some paid ad spend behind some of our old content. So now all this old content, the old content that we've made is like popping up in people's algorithms. And all of like the hardo 8U dad coaches have come into my mentions. Um, and it's like, guys, I love you, but you don't understand what's coming next, And I understand the perspective that thinking that like, well, if my kid is just like the winningest winner at 8, then that's good because they're going to be more likely to be the winningest winner at 9 and 10 and 11 and 12. But you don't understand that in those 6 years, so much is going to change. Your child is going to change. The game is going to change. And if you're not mindful of what those changes look like and the demands that it's going to put on skill and the demand that it's going to put on athletic output paired with skill, I think you're setting a child up for long-term failure, right? And even if this was like an 8U kid pitch game, which I suppose it could have been, and I certainly hope it was, because if it was an intentional walk at 8U coach pitch, then my God. Um, but if it was 8U kid
Oh.
pitch, right? Even see it from the perspective of the pitcher, right?
Yeah,
I
you're telling him
I
he's
would
not good enough to get
never
that kid out.
bang. And that's the thing. Like I think one of the more hilarious comments that somebody popped off about was like was saying about me that like this is some soy boy who has daddy issues, blah blah blah. Like you need to raise winners. And it's like, well, first of all, I can guarantee you I drink more whole milk than you do. Second of all, I can guarantee you I bench more than you do. So like you can miss me with all that stuff. But beyond that posturing of like an older 46-year-old man who has one athletic skill left because everything else has left the stadium. Um, I'm telling you I want my kids to compete. I'm telling you, I would much more give my kid the rope to go produce something, find a barrel, strike that kid out, earn it, right? Like that's the thing that I'm advocating for. I'm advocating for kids getting an opportunity to win because of what they learn. What you're advocating for Is it like, I'm going to win because we fail the least? Guess what, man? It's baseball. It's
Right.
baseball, and failure is implicit.
Well,
So,
life
like,
life is the same way.
correct. Life is the same way. Like, I don't, you know,
Those dads
I
are going
didn't,
to be the same ones that are saying like, "Oh, my kid didn't play because the high school coach doesn't like him."
yeah, like, hey, man, you know what the high school coach likes? He likes knocks. He likes ball players. He likes kids that can compete. But you, as a young parent, if you are depriving kids an opportunity to understand what that looks like and develop those tools, you're not raising winners. You are coddling children right now to check a box in a box score that makes you feel good. And they're not going to remember that game in 6 months, and they certainly won't remember it in 6 years. And that to me is a problem. And I think it's a problem that is indicative of like where we are in youth sports as a whole right now. Because the more that we go down this path where everybody's on a club and a rec baseball team, and there's some large scale stuff at hand about kind of what recreational baseball has become that has led to that, I understand. Um, but the more that we go down that path, and the more that these teams, largely communicate value to other parents through their win-loss record, I think we have the opportunity to get pushed further and further down that way. So when I see things like tryouts for 4U teams, which again is a real thing, I see it through this lens of, we've kind of continued to professionalize youth sport in this way, and we've brought the perspective of professional sports to youth sports. So we can't have, hey, 4-year-old parents, let's just go play, right? Let's play games. And I don't even know that that game needs to be like 3 up, 3 down baseball. I think it probably shouldn't at 4U, to be honest. Um, they logically go like, well, we got to get these kids ready to win at 5. So we're going to start tryouts for a team at 4, right? Because the value we're communicating revolves largely around one thing and one thing only, which is how many games did we win? Out of how many games we played, how many games did we win? And we're not measuring things like, well, number one, how many of these kids actually don't hate baseball at the end of the year? Right? Like that would be a thing we can measure. But even beyond that, we don't spend enough time measuring the skill in the learning, right? Because that's a thing that they do in kindergarten classes, in Montessori schools, in first grade. They set learning objectives, and your teacher is going to say, okay, kiddies, at the end of the day, these are the things we tried to learn. They're going to give your parents some sort of report card of scoring that said, did you learn that?
Mm-hmm.
If at 4U baseball or at 8U baseball, there should be a checkbox on that thing did your kids get opportunity to figure out the pitches that they could hit, right? Did your kid get the freedom to swing and start to learn how to develop what we would call with older players an approach, right? I know my kid likes middle in fastballs, right? He demolishes him. If you give him something middle in, especially maybe a touch in the lower third, also in, as a right-handed hitter, he's going to turn on it. He's going to hit it real far. He loves that pitch. He's learned that because for years and years and years and years and years, he started to identify the stuff that he wants to attack as a hitter. That happens because we gave him the freedom to swing, right? Now, were there opportunities along the way that, I could have just told him to like, hey, we're just going to take sign, right? I don't trust this pitcher to throw a strike. I'm just going to give you take signs infinitely. You're going to get on base. You're fast. Youth catchers are bad. A walk turns into a triple really easily. Yeah, we could have done that thing too. And if we did that thing, it's possible we might have won more games along the way. But what does his high school baseball care about? What does his high school baseball coach want? Does he want a kid that's passive at the plate? No, right? That's not a thing that the high school coaches are looking for. They're looking for dudes with tools. But you don't have a time machine. I mean, I certainly don't. So you can like game theory optimal your way to play this game from like 4 through 14. You might miss a ton of opportunities along the way to develop skills that are like literally inevitable that you will need. And now we've changed it from like, hey, you had the opportunity to at least play high school baseball, to at least have that experience, to now you get cut at 14. smell you, like you've been playing this game for like 10 years. It just started to mean something,
Well, look how
it
good he
just
is at taking a pitch. He could take a pitch with the best of them.
sure,
How did
sure.
he
And
get
like,
cut?
because he can't hit a ball in the infield. And you can't, and again, people tell me that like that this is some sort of straw man argument, as if I haven't seen kids literally try out for high school baseball teams that have been in my leagues or I've been around them over this last 14 years of coaching, because I've seen it. I've seen what happens when, as a freshman, you get placed on the lower level team because you can't sniff any upper level competition, and they literally can't find a place for you to play other than second base. And that might not even be an opportunity, because you might only play second base for that next year. You're certainly not going to beat the guy that's playing second base on JV now, because that guy's going to continue to get better. And it's just, I think I think the more that we allow our perspective to be dominated by, I don't know why my camera keeps freezing. That's weird. Um,
We're
I
back.
think the more that we allow our perspective to get dominated by just like this one single value prop in youth baseball that there isn't a single high school coach in the country that cares about, we're going down the wrong path.
Oh, I mean, I don't disagree with you at all. I mean, it's not even just youth baseball. It's like when I coached 16 and 17, um, a lot of dads, this would drive them nuts, but like I didn't give I didn't give one sign in 3 years of coaching 16 through 17 baseball when I coached third base. The only sign I ever gave was like the choke sign. And that was like, hey, this is not a good situation to steal. I don't want you running here. We're not running. Other than that, everybody has the green light on the bases, and I don't give bunt signs. Now, we will talk about like, this is a good opportunity. And my sign was like, if you want, it's up to you. And that was
Yep.
like, hey, we got guys on first and second, no outs. We're late in the game. If you want to bunt, we've already discussed this is going to be a drag bunt down the third baseline, just fair, just foul. Great.
Right.
Do you want to know how many kids actually put that bunt down? I can't tell you because I don't remember. I remember
Right.
one. And I remember we were playing one of the teams we had like a rival with in the area. It was a bracket game. We were supposed to start at 9, ended up not starting till like 11:30 at night over at East
Love
Cobb.
it. I've
And
been there.
yeah, it's like 1 a.m. And we were down by 1, and we had first and second no outs top of the last inning. And one of my hitters came up, and I looked at him and I said, Balchi, if you want it. And
Yeah.
he's a good bunter. He's a good bunter. If he drops down a drag bunt there, we were down by 2, because in my head I'm like, I don't want to tie this game. If he drops down a drag bunt there, do we got a better chance to win? Of course, like probably, than him getting out. But the lower the level, they make more errors when you bunt. Like they throw the ball around. So at the lower levels, bunting, you're going to have more success than you do at the higher levels.
Yep.
First pitch, he rips a ball down the right field line. I'm like, I look like a genius. The right fielder makes some diving. Play. It was sick. He makes a diving play, and we actually got doubled off at
Sure.
first base. So
Yep.
not only do I look like, hindsight 2020, it's the wrong play because Bulch gets out, but then we get doubled off, and it's just like, man, I look like. But in my head, I'm like, look, there's going to come a point where we're down by 2 and bases are loaded, and Bulch comes up. I can't have him bunt just to get the guys
Yep.
over. He needs a hit there, right? If he's never been in these pressure situations, and he doesn't know really how to hit with guys on base and the game on the line, he's never going to do it, and he's not going to have as much success. Like you said with the Kobe Bryant, where he said every rep gives him a chance closer to perfection. Nobody's ever going to be perfect in that situation, but you rarely can get that situation in a game where you come up and your at bat is, everybody knows, like, this is a massive at bat. You can practice it, but it's still hard to emulate that adrenaline. So
Yeah, and especially when you're imparting that type of perspective to kids about what you think that they're capable of as a coach, because it means something to them, like the signals that we send about the things that we think that they are capable of and the situations that we're going to give them the freedom to compete in, they internalize that stuff. Like the best example I can give of that specific thing is we had a tournament, like a 9U tournament a couple years ago. I think this actually might have been the first year that we had academy teams. So we're playing, it was early in the season. We're playing this indoor tournament. It's a weird little facility we have out here, where there's like, it's a 3-pack of fields. They all have like 120 or 140 foot like netting lines. Like above this line is a double, above this line is a home run. You
mhm,
can play it live off the netting on the ceiling. Like it's a really odd environment. But here, I mean, if you want to get games in January and February, oftentimes the weather will not allow. So, people would go play them. We don't do that one anymore, but we did at the time. Um, so our 9U team is up, and this is the first year coming out of COVID. So you're literally talking about like 8, 9-year-olds who missed a year and a half of baseball. So it was weird, and
mhm,
we had a young team, first year org, everything that means. So there's this one kid on the team that we're playing who like he laid down bunts every single at bat that he had. I think he had like 2 or 3 at bats before. So they come up, and it was again one of these events where we're kind of running up against a clock. And they had first and third, 2 down, and the same kid comes up to the plate who had been given the bunt sign every single at bat before. They didn't give him a sign. He laid down the bunt regardless, because that was what they taught that they had taught him that was capable of. He bunts it right back to my pitcher. Pitcher gloves it, throws it right to first base. Ball game. We're done. They had that kid doing like penalty sit-ups in the dugout after the game because he laid down a bunt that wasn't called for. But like
that's what he
that
knows.
child, that child did the thing that he knows, and it's the thing that you conditioned him to believe that he was capable of, because you never gave him the freedom to actually swing the bat. And I realize that's a little bit of an extreme example, but I do think it's demonstrative of how, as coaches, and again, specifically parents who coach, that's a really significant signal that you can send to these kids when you are implicitly telling them whether you trust them or not to compete. And again, at the lowest level of competition and consequence, if I'm not giving kids that type of freedom, I don't know that I'm doing a good enough job of teaching. You know.
I agree wholeheartedly, and it's the guys that have done this long enough where they have good perspective. It's easy to make the connections from youth baseball to high school baseball to college baseball, and also baseball in general to life. Like you talk about, like baseball players have this resiliency. Like we can go and just get told no out at the college scene
Yep.
as many times because like whatever I don't care. Like it's always next in every aspect of the game. Like you go up there and it's and you get a pitch and it's a strike, or you look stupid on it. Like well, you got to go next pitch. Well,
Next pitch, baby.
yeah, and then after the next pitch, it's the next at bat, and then after the next at bat, it's the next game. Like it's always like, oh, I got my butt beat. Like so what? Guess what? We all know the cliche. Like the best thing about baseball is there's always tomorrow, and it's the same. It's the same way. And there's so many life teachings you get out of the game, but you have to be willing to open yourself up to that and taking a step back and saying, well, we didn't win, all right, at whatever level, but what are the positives we took out today? Well, Balch got an at bat with the guys on first and second, no outs in the last inning when I could have bunted him. Um, you know, this
Got a
set,
barrel,
yeah,
right?
this set, and the other, and it's like, hey, Balch, like, look, I know you got out, but like you swung at the first pitch fastball. You hit it to right field, but it's an outside pitch. You were on time. You barreled it. Like that's all you can do, and then they grow that confidence. And then he comes up next time and he's like more comfortable with it. So, but I mean, we've talked for 50 minutes on that aspect of the game and youth coaching, but I think it's so important for youth to understand why we are doing what we're doing, and on ramp the coaches learning curve. Like we all have to be the young jackwagon that makes ourselves look really stupid, and then somebody that we really care about tells us like, hey, you didn't handle that situation right with so and so's parent or with this 10-year-old. Like, and then we all have those moments in life where we're like, oh, like what? Wow. Wow. And if we can just cut those moments down or just get past them or learn from the first time, like this book and what you're saying and how you're going about it, hopefully this on ramps those younger coaches to get past that or mitigate really how deep of a mess up we have as a human and a coach. So um but we do need to we have to do um get down to some nuts and bolts stuff. I got some questions that I do need to
Yeah,
ask you. I
send it.
want your opinion on, maybe not from a data perspective, but like where actually, yeah, like the data perspective of the first one I got, and I could never coach 13 and 14 because well, I could, but the pitching
Mhm.
in 13 and 14. How do you manage a pitching staff at that age? Because what you see in today's day and age is like the best pitcher or two will throw an inning on Friday, an inning on Saturday, or the pitch limit to where he can come on Sunday and he's able to throw all the way up to the full limit. Like I see that happen so many times, and I don't know the answer. So this is
Sure.
I'm new as well. I imagine it's not great for a kid's arm, but how do you manage pitching staffs in the youth baseball?
Sure. I think the number one thing to start with is you need to wrap your brain around this idea of workload. Um, and I know that like, workload management in professional sports gets like a bad rap nowadays. And I truly, 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 from the depth of my soul, don't care what people think about like whether LeBron sits out a game or not. Like, whatever. This is a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about throwing workload in youth baseball. What we really mean in a technical sense is a combination of both the volume of pitches that you're throwing and the intensity of them. And if you basically combine those two things, you can get this idea of like, what does your workload look like? Um, so I think some of the foundational research that you can kind of pay attention to kind of goes in two different directions. Um, one of the things that we understand about the most common injuries we have in youth baseball. So you're talking about your little league elbow, little league shoulder. So your medial epicondylitis, and I can't remember what the shoulder specific variation of it, but like the point is that these are repetitive stress injuries. Um, and if you look at the research about them, everything that we kind of understand is basically that the biggest contributor is not weighted balls, it's not pitching to a radar gun. The biggest contributor is when you have more stress than you are trained to accept. And as fatigue goes up, mechanical consistency goes down, and somewhere along the way, if you continue to pitch through that, that's when your rate of injury can kind of go up really, really drastically. Um, so that's kind of what we understand on the medical side of things. We can get into the whole weighted ball discussion. I think probably as an ancillary to this one because it's a fun one. But what we understand is that basically like fatigue is something that we want to really specifically avoid.
Mm-hmm.
We want to avoid throwing with fatigue and continuing to like do that thing with young. I think you want to avoid that period, but it's a pretty significant consideration when you're dealing with younger athletes.
Is it
So
because
we
of
need,
their body's not developed, or is it because like a 16 or 17-year-old knows what it's like when they're fatigued, where a younger kid might just keep throwing because coach told them to?
I think, I mean, it's hard to chicken or egg that one. You know, and part of the problem with some of the research that's done is a lot of this stuff has when it comes to that particular aspect of it, like surveys of the athlete, you know, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old, the variance in terms of their ability to give you like an accurate answer to like, well, I feel like I'm like 50% fatigued today. You know, that they're kids, so like it's really hard for them to
Right.
say that. But you know, we do believe that basically there's a pretty direct link between fatigue and continuing to pitch or continuing to throw even um through that fatigue is going to lead to injury. I think kids at a biological level are pretty resilient, but that doesn't mean that they're bulletproof. So when you have this idea of workload in your mind, which is both it's both volume of throwing and intensity of throwing. Well, if that's true, then we can't only monitor the throws that happen on the bump because most of these kids, even at the 16 and 17 level, they're all two-way players, right?
Bingo. That's the hard
So
part.
even if we track, even if we do a really diligent job of tracking the throws that they have on the mound, if we don't pay attention to the throws that they have in pregame and the throws that they had in practice the week before and the throws that they had from in the field, if I'm only paying attention to the stuff that happens around the bump, I'm missing like a lot of the equation to really define what that workload even looks like.
Hmm.
So yeah, you know, things like MLB Pitch Smart I think are great, and they're much better than you know the old innings standard that existed before that. You know, unfortunately, there's still large tournament organizations that basically still define their stuff by innings. I don't think that's great.
Right.
You know, youth baseball, you can have a 9 pitch immaculate inning, and you could have a 39 pitch inning or a 59 pitch inning. All of those things are in play.
It's an immaculate inning for the other team.
Yeah, right. Um, but point being, I think to get the most informed decision about what throwing fitness looks like, or basically like health on the mound, you have to be able to understand all of it, not just the stuff that happens on the bump. And then to kind of go one level deeper, um, there's this relationship between what we would call as like chronic workload and acute workload. Chronic workload is basically the way that this stuff is kind of played out over a longer period of time. So maybe like 7 days or maybe 14 or 28 days. And then the acute workload is like what happens today. Um, and if you look at the research that we've done, the research that other people have done, um, what we generally understand is that you want the ratio of these things to kind of be reasonable, right? And what you want to avoid are big spikes in workload. Um, and there's a couple different ways you can have spikes. One way would be that, like, let's say I throw a pen on Monday, okay, and I throw like a 40 pitch pen, and then I don't throw on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then I throw on Saturday, right? So now I've got like decent workload, and then nothing, 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 and then pretty decent workload. So I've got spikes, right?
Hmm.
Those spikes in workload on a chronic basis are concerning, right? And like I think the way to kind of think about this outside of a baseball specific sense is like if I bench 315 on Friday and I don't do anything on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then it comes back around to the next Friday and I try to just like full on like full send 100% again, my body probably is not going to react to that pretty well. Right? Like the volume of it's not necessarily a volume thing, it's the intensity and then this really big period of inactivity, where we're really not able to take advantage of this periodization idea that is just like that's how humans relate to stimulus, right? If you if you're familiar with like the couch to 5K program, like the app, they'll try to get people to be able to run, or things like a road to 100 push-ups. Day one is not try to rip 100 push-ups or try to run for 5 miles. It's like try to walk for a mile and then try to walk for a mile and a half and then try to run for a half a mile and then walk for a half mile, right? It's like we want stimulus to go up and then it goes down and then it goes up again. And if you want to do the technical research into this, what we're talking about is this idea of like super compensation. I introduce stimulus, I have to recover from it, but then if I have adequate recovery, I'm going to get better. That's just like the way that works. Um, High intent throwing on a Friday which then allows you to have high intent throwing on a Sunday. That's back to back high workload. Um, it's hard to condition for that. And it's hard to even like make sure that that's something you're going to be able to safely do if we don't pay attention to the throwing you had in the field on Friday, and then the throwing you had in the field on Saturday, and then the throwing in the field that you had on Sunday before you get back on the bump. Um, I realize that like all of this is very complicated and dense to unpack. If I had to give people a very basic suggestion, I would say the number one thing that you should do to try to do this at a better level is at least follow MLB Pitch Smart, because not only is it going to have limits on the pitching, but it's also going to define the rest that you should take afterwards, right? If my kid throws, um, gosh, I'm trying to remember. If my kid throws like 75 pitches, he's probably going to rest for 4 days. If I understand that, and I'm running a team or an org, and I think, okay, well, we're going to be playing on Friday, and I might have this kid pitch. So that means Saturday's rest, Sunday's rest, Monday's rest, and the next time I can bring him out is Tuesday. And I know that that's true for the rest of the kids on my program. Well, then I have to distribute the workload over the inning or over the course of the entire weekend. I can't go into these weekends having like 4 horses that I'm going to ride.
Right.
So if I know that's true, then when like my team starts training in April, I'm developing everybody on the team in consideration of that. So I do think that like the best thing you can do is just kind of pay attention to things like MLB Pitch Smart, not only on like the volume side of things, but also on the rest that correlates with it. Now, I'll be honest that like you could follow MLB Pitch Smart to a T and still end up overworked. So I think the next layer of kind of doing that is just, for me, it's utilizing technology like Driveline Pulse. It's just like a wearable monitor that kind of goes on the throwing arm. And if you wear that not only in practices, but also in games, then now at an individual level, I can understand workload both on the acute side and then on the chronic side. And I'm capturing everything, not just the stuff that kind of exists on the mound. It's like $100. It's a pretty cheap tool. If you didn't have that, then I think the next best thing you could do would be just kind of establishing some sort of idea of what your kid's competitive fastball looks like in kind of an assessment environment, and then monitoring velocity. Because again, by monitoring velocity, I'm not just having kids quote unquote throw to the gun. I'm actually trying to monitor against fatigue,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like my kid is 15. The hardest pitch he's ever thrown is 84.9 on a TrackMan, right? He just had his motion capture session at Driveline, and he got up to 82.8. So, their velocity and output is a fluctuation. Um, so he'll go into pitching this year in high school. And if he's 80 and up, I think he's fine. If I see his velocity drop below that, now I've got a concern about fatigue. And now I think he needs to get off the bump because he's just in a fatigue state. Continuing to pitch in a fatigue state, bad idea.
And it's not even just for his arm either. Like it could be, I don't know. He had a tough workout with leg day, and he just
Oh,
it's not moving right, and it's not just his arm that you can hurt. It's
yes.
any part of the body, and it injuries at a younger age are tough because you don't want to like stunt the natural growth of your kid, and there's so much developing that goes on, especially like at the high school level. If a kid has to take 4 months off from lifting and his agility training, whatever you want to call it, then obviously we already have an injury, but now he's just falling further behind and he's
Correct.
missing out on this development. And some injuries are going to happen, man, right? Like, you're going to
Yeah.
you're going to slide into a base and roll an ankle. You're going to, do, any of that stuff. But I think that doesn't mean that we can just be stupid or neglect our brain when it comes. Like if you question it all, like, should we pitch this kid? The answer is probably no.
Yep. Correct. I mean, I don't think there's anything we do truly that's more important with our academy teams than keeping kids healthy. Like look, we've got a great system of player development. I'm not going to be shy about the fact that I think at Driveline, we are the best in the world at what we do. What we do with our academy teams is we basically run a slightly distilled version of the exact same player development system that we do for college and pro guys. Um, but the reason that in the youth space we do that inordinately in a team fashion is because if we control the team, then we control the behavior of the kids on that team. I control the practice schedule, I control the game schedule, I control the rest, right? And if I can do all of that, if I can control as many of those variables as possible, I think it's more likely that I can keep kids healthy. And if I can keep them healthy, then I can keep them developing because all of this development stuff is all great if kids are participating. If they can't participate because they're not healthy, it doesn't matter. Like that, and that I think that gets overlooked a lot. Is it like, people again will, demonize us for, things like weighted balls or doing maybe some high intent throwing sessions in the form of like pull downs and run and guns and whatever you have, or developing bat speed. But they don't realize that we're only able to do those things because we control as many variables around that kid's activity to allow us to do that safely. Like that's the reason why Academy as a product, if you want to think about it that way, is basically revolves around a team. We are developing some stuff this year that'll come out for allowing kids to be able to participate in some of the stuff we do developmentally without leaving their own teams, and take advantage of some of the tech that we have to basically assess where they are and help them continue to develop. But I'm pretty convicted that one of the amusing outputs of that program is going to be that we're going to see the better development results come from the kids that are on our teams, which has everything to do with this, kind of choose your own adventure idea of how we are defining our schedule and our behavior. Um, you can assess with Driveline, and we will give you a ton of information about who you are right now. But the question is, what are you going to do with it? Like you've got, I can give a kid um, a report on their biomechanics on the hitting or the throwing side that's no different than the one that I would give to Clayton Kershaw or Mookie Betts, right?
Mhm.
That's great. What are you going to do about it, right? What do you do with this information? It's highly actionable to inform what we would call programming, which is basically just like, well, what are the skills we're trying to develop next? What's the low-hanging fruit that we could attack to help this kid get better, and how do we continue to move up the chain over time? Um, in order to do that, you have to have the schedule to allow you to take advantage of those development opportunities. And I think, again, one of the things that you have a problem in youth baseball is you have like very driven kids who have very driven parents who have a lot of disposable income. And it's like, little John or little Katie is going to play on a travel team, and they're going to play, 5 to 7 games on a weekend. And then Johnny or Katie is going to have a hitting lesson and a pitching lesson and an agility lesson and a couple team practices in a week. And then they're going to play another series of 5 to 7 games. Well, that hitting coach is not talking to the pitching coach, who's not talking to the agility coach, who's not talking to the team coach. And if any one of those people is making decisions about training that are either not in consideration of what happened last weekend, right? Because you don't know how many innings little Johnny or little Katie pitched, played, hit, how much rest they got, or you don't know what's happening next weekend. Hey, we're going to Lake Point, we're going to Cobb, we're going to wherever, and we're going to expect to play all these other games. Man, it's conflict, right? It's
Mhm.
natural conflict because right hand, left hand, nobody's talking to each other. What we're trying to do with Academy, and specifically with our Academy teams, is I want to eliminate all of that stuff because my guys that run our skill floor are in constant communication with our strength guys, with our PT, with their head coaches. That's how we can do all the stuff that we do because we put it in just one singular container, and everybody's on the same team in terms of not only in terms of the coaches, right? The coaches are on the same team. Everybody's in communication. Um, it's, we're still learning, right? I'm sure that we're going
Oh
to do
yeah.
things differently next year than we've done this year. The way that we're doing things in year 4 of our program are very different than what we did in year 1. But it's all in service of getting as close to that objective as possible, which is How do we develop the best baseball player skill, and how do we give them opportunities to stress test that skill appropriately in competition without opening up the door to a bunch of inordinate injury risk?
Hmm.
And of course, just like have it be fun along the way. Like that again is just like the number one thing is it has to be fun. They have to love it at a very, very deep level, which means I want them as engaged as possible, which again kind of goes in this conversation about why we train with data, but also how we communicate it to kids and parents.
So, transitioning to the next topic or question I have for you is with keeping it fun and loving the game. How do you how do you gamify a competitive environment and to maximize competition and also keeping the child's love of the game up, but also making them realize, I want to say winning isn't everything, but like we want to focus on development and make it competitive, but also I want you to love it. How do you do all of that
Sure,
in one?
sure.
Take a
I mean,
deep breath because that's a loaded question, baby.
yeah, yeah. I think again, it's really helpful to have everybody that's involved in the ecosystem on the same page about what that looks like, and specifically, look, I can run the best engaging gamified environment as possible if when that kid gets in the car, the conversation that they have with their parent is very different. Then now again we have conflict. So when I say having everybody on the same page, I really do mean that, like, trying to enlist parents and help them understand, I think, the core intention of this stuff, which is difficult because parents aren't professional baseball coaches. They
Mm-hmm.
have their own experiences that they bring to the table. And again, all this other stuff we kind of talked about previously about how parents don't want to see their children fail, right? Like that's important.
Yeah, of course.
Um, I think in terms of like the practice environment design, it's really simple, man. Like you have to create game environments that are relevant to the skill that you're trying to develop. I'm a very big proponent of the constraint-led approach. CLA, I think, has been tremendously informative of my development as a coach. It started with reading a blog way back in the day written by Driveline director of hitting Jason Ochart, who's now one of the directors of the Red Sox farm system, on their hitting stuff. It's a great blog that anybody can read. It's called Coaching Hitting Mechanics Part 1 and 2, and it's great. And the kind of core idea is that, again, the way that I was coached is like the coach is going to tell you that there's a flaw in your swing, and they're going to have you take reps until you like start to reduce that flaw, and then they're going to figure out what other flaw you have.
Mm-hmm.
It ends up being like this very like negative feedback cycle just over and over and over.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, what we try to do is kind of go like, all right, well, we're going to understand and accept that kids are going to have a lot of variance in terms of the way that they move and the mechanics that they display. That variance is going to be a result of the fact that they are immature in like the skill of the sport, and they're also just like physiologically immature, period. Right? Like kids are not small adults. They don't have the same coordination capacity as adults. They don't have the same strength and output capacity as adults. They don't have the same proprioceptive capacity. Proprioception is just like a fancy $5 word for how accurate you are at locating your body in space. And like literally every skill that we have in baseball kind of revolves around that. Kids are really immature. So if you accept that and you accept that variance, but you also accept that we can start to kind of like adapt and shape those patterns of movement. Okay, well now this is CLA. This is the constraint-led approach. I'm going to come up with a constraint, and I'm going to give the kid the space to figure out how to solve that constraint. And if I do my job well, solving that constraint in the environment that I create should lead to the development of better mechanics. Okay, so I just used a bunch of $5 words. Let's break this down into something that's a lot more palatable. Um, think about kids in their like young kids and their inability to have like a full body proximal to distal kinetic sequence in their swing, right? Like a lot of kids, they
Mm-hmm.
kind of get in their stance and it's just like arms only, right? There's no load, there's no coil.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, That's something that they generally struggle with kind of coordinating and executing. Okay. So, one of my favorites is the Happy Gilmore or the shuffle step swing, right? Where we're gonna or step behinds, whatever you call them, right? I'm gonna get a couple steps away from point of contact, step, step. Now I've got like my lower body is sequencing, and I can kind of sequence my upper body into it, right? Um, if we do that, we should get better about the task of learning how to sequence our swing when I'm not doing that particular drill. So the constraint in this specific environment that I'm going to create is I'm going to have you basically have to add this additional linear movement in the swing with our lower body that we're going to sequence in with our upper body. Kids who might struggle with it at first, and they're going to kind of just like do everything at once, but then if you do it over time, the adaptation that you should see is that again that like we get the thing we want to see, which is that the lower half is kind of gone. We have fired the hips, we've coiled a little bit, we've loaded. You get a little bit of like delay to the torso rotation, a little bit of stretch shortening cycle. We got that big stretch, and then we just like let the rubber band go, bang, barrel. Um, and I can do that in an environment, in a game environment called Don't Hurt the Puppies. And this is a game that I created a long time ago on a dirt field here in Shoreline. And I took like a bunch of like soccer cones that are like the 9-inch soccer cones or whatever, right? Put them all over the infield. And I've don't hate me. I also coached soccer while I was coaching youth baseball.
That's
So I had a
great.
crap ton of cones. Um, so I put all these cones out in the infield and I bring all my little boys and girls together. All right, boys and girls, we're going to play a little game. I'm going to put your imagination hats on. Somebody raise your hand if you got a puppy at home. And some kid's going to raise their hand. I got a puppy. Okay, Johnny, what's your puppy's name? My puppy's name is Bingo. Okay, cool. So, little boys and girls, here's what you can imagine. We're going to look out in that outfield. You see all those cones out there, right? They go, yes. Well, those aren't cones. Every one of those cones, that's a little bingo out there. See all those little bingos out on the field you put on your imagination hats? And I go, yeah, coach, I see it. We love bingo, right? We want to keep bingo safe, right? How are we going to do that? We got to hit a line drive. Boys and girls, we got to hit a line drive. So we're going to do Happy Gilmore drill, and I'm going to set the ball up on a tee, maybe some side soft, and we're going to do, it's going to be points, right? Every time that you hit a baseball that clears bingo, right? All these little cones, you get points. And every time we knock one of those off, we're going to lose a point. Okay. And everybody's going to go through this drill station, and we'll do it in like teams of 3 or 4. Because again, I'm very big on like small groups. We're going to run through stations, make sure everybody gets a lot of reps. And we're going to see which group is going to have the highest amount of score. Like who's got the highest score today, right?
Who killed the least amount of puppies today?
Right. Who hurt the least puppies, right? So inherently, there's a bunch of things going on.
Mm-hmm.
I've got the players training in some sort of constraint that I believe that if they're not going to solve it overnight, right? That's not how you solve
promoting good movement.
Right. And the more that we can kind of practice that with consistency, not only about the drill, but also with the intention of the drill, the movement pattern is going to adapt. I'm also setting a very simple ball flight target, right? I need you to hit a line drive. This is Ted Williams 101. Hit the ball hard in the air. And then I'm also doing it in a competitive and gamified sense where, look, I got 4 groups of 3, right? So I got 4 teams. And I'm certainly going to reward the team that has the highest points scored in this drill, right? And I'm probably bringing some Now and Laters or Jolly Ranchers or whatever in my coaching bag to give those kids some candy to incentivize who's going to win. But what I'm also going to do is I'm going to track these groups, and I'm going to say group 1 had 14, group 2, 12, group 3, 6, group 4 had 4. I might keep those groups together. And then on Wednesday's practice, if I'm doing this on a Sunday, I'm going to run the same groups and I'm going to track their scores. And oh, hey, group 4, you had 4 points last week. Well, this week for on the first practice, this now you had 8. Hey, you guys had huge improvement. You had the most improvement of all those groups. Boom, I'm going to give you some candy.
So
it's competitive. It's gamified. It has a specific intention and a specific constraint. And if you understand that at a very deep level, you can understand how to develop almost any skill in this game in a competitive and gamified setting.
I love that you actually, a lot of people can do day 1 where it's like, hey, whoever wins, this is the drill, you get the most. But I love that you said you'll bring them back and you'll keep the same teams. And day 2 isn't necessarily about who gets the most. points. It's who improves the most. I love that. Here's the next question I have for you. With the Happy Gilmore drill, and I think you're give them a target of, because we want to hit the ball in the air, right?
Yep.
We're going to keep that variable the same. With the Happy Gilmore drill, we're trying to get their lower half incorporated, sequencing. On maybe you have a kid that's struggling with the Happy Gilmore drill. On day 3, would you say, would you have another drill that you would basically do instead of the Happy Gilmore, but does the same thing, right? Like it's the same. You're teaching the same thing, but you're using different language because that kid is struggling with that drill or comprehending what you want of that drill. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And I think, if again, we have some of this stuff in terms of like the 6-week practice schedule that's in the book, and also like the yearly training plan that's in there, because the whole idea is you start to understand this stuff longitudinally, right? How do you understand this development over time, which is honestly very different than like the lesson model. The lesson model is predicated on, you bring your child to me and I'm a fat old guy and I'm going to sit on a bucket. And at the end of those like 50 minutes, I charge you $150 and I'm going to say, hey, your kid has this problem, this problem, this problem. And then next week, I'm going to like, well, now I've got this problem, this problem, this problem, right? Like it's all this kind of negative incentivization of finding flaws and trying to deploy a binary fix. That's not how skill acquisition works, right? Like that's just straight up not the way that it works. So I think you have to think about these things longitudinally. Um, I had this conversation though is with a coach probably a week and a half ago. So it's fantastic you asked this. He's running a team and his kids are doing the Happy Gilmore drill, and he has a couple kids that are having that are struggling in it because all they're doing is just like hitting pop-ups over and over and over. Can't buy a flush barrel, can't buy a hard hit ball in the air. So he was telling me, he's like, the problem that I'm running into is that like they're achieving the task, like they're not hurting the puppies because they're hitting like soft pop-ups into the outfield.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I, and he's like, I feel like I'm doing everything right. I was like, okay, well, there's a couple things. Number one, the scoring system doesn't need to be carved in stone, right? You can define for your kids what a line drive is versus a soft pop-up.
Change the
And
goalpost.
right, and it could be, hey, line drives are 3 points, right? Line drives are 3, soft pop-ups are a -1, ground balls are a -3, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can again shift the incentives in the game to kind of drive to really make it clear to the kids through scoring that one of these things is like really the ideal we're shooting for.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing you need to kind of get comfortable with is sometimes being pretty extreme in shifting the intention based on the stimulus that the kids need. So if a kid, let's say that the kid is doing this off of like side soft and not off of a tee because, hitting pop-ups off a tee could be you're just clipping way too much of the tee, and we can
Right.
talk like let's assume that it's not off of a tee. Um, the kid probably, if I had to like judge coach from afar, is that they probably are like way too uppercutty underneath it, which can be a thing, and they're constantly like clipping the bottom of the ball. I'm not saying that I want the ground ball to be an outcome because the game says don't hurt the puppies, and you do that by hitting ground balls. But for that specific kid, I might tell him or her to hit a ground ball, right? Because I'm telling them hit a line drive and they're constantly underneath it and clipping it this way. So I need to drastically shift their intention in order to try to help them find a feel for the thing that they're trying to produce, right? We deal with all the time in terms of like we'll play a game called Around the World. Again, it's a game that's in the book. Um, we want kids to be able to get comfortable hitting liners, pull middle oppo, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pull middle oppo middle pull, and we'll run through that cycle. And we'll also do that and introduce some variability in terms of like short bats, long bats, heavy bats, skinny bats, etc. Um, Hitting the ball hard on the pull side is like a very discrete and valuable skill. Not a lot of kids can hit a ball clean on the pull side. Like
Nope.
that's
Nope.
but it's a good thing, right?
That's when you have
Um,
arrived in swing mechanics, in my opinion.
yeah,
Is when you can pull the
right.
baseball
Well,
in the air without snap hooking it, and keep it fair.
Right.
But that's another
Right. And you
conversation.
know,
That's another
right,
conversation.
right, right. Right. And it's a very valuable thing. Kids, a lot of times, if they have to get hit a ball on the pull side, they're going to get super way, like the contact point is way, way out front, and they're just like snap hooking the crap out of it. Um, you also might have kids who just like can't even find that feel, period, right? Everything is like middle oppo. And it could be because they've just been coached to let the ball travel super deep. It could be that they don't really trust their bat speed and understand how they can catch it a little bit appropriately out front. So for that kids, it's like literally struggling to hit the ball pull clean. And if I just tell them like, well, hey, hit the ball pull side, and they can't. Well, I need to shift my intention. So again, we're very big on like this idea of external cues. So instead of me going like, hey, I want you to hit it kind of over that way where there's like a like if you're in the middle cage at Driveline, I don't want I would be telling a kid to hit the ball at the pitching machine that's in the cage next to them,
Mm-hmm.
right? But if that's not giving me the adaptation that I want, hey, I want you to imagine if we're on a field, there's like a hot dog vendor, foul
Mm-hmm.
territory on the side, hit it over his head, right? I need to I can shift and manipulate the intention or the ball flight goal in order to find an adaptation. And I'm not asking kids to hit balls foul. That's literally not the thing I'm looking for, but I'm giving that intention to try to shift the ball flight goal that they're getting from over here to over here to over here, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it's again, it's like manipulating within the environment based on the adaptation that you need to get.
It's like one of my favorite tools is the harness that you can get in as a hitter. It's got the bungee cords on it.
Uh-huh.
And when I was first getting into coaching, when I was young, we would have this harness, and in my head, it was like, okay, this kid struggles staying back, so he likes to leak out front. I'm gonna put this harness on, and I'm gonna pull him back.
Mhm.
And then when I got to Oglethorpe and college coaching, and kind of like Geo just transformed me from one old school thinking of swing down to create backspin and all this stuff, you realize that if this kid leaks out front and you pull him back, you're just helping him do the drill okay because you're giving him these factors. The better way
Right.
to do this is if he leaks out front and leaks forward, put that bungee cord out front and pull him forward. So he feels that, so he has to fight against it.
Yeah.
And that's how you break that habit. It's almost something similar to what you're talking about with the hot dog vendor. It's like change the outcome or the goal desired in order to get the result you want. And then like kids can feel it. Because I think naturally kids' bodies move mostly the way we want, like the way they should. I think a lot of like
Oh,
hitting
right. Right.
coaches, I think a lot of hitting coaches kind of ruin that where they become so mechanical. But anytime I've ever worked with a younger kid at a youth level, like young 14 or younger, even 10, 8, whatever, when you tell them like hit this ball in the air, they usually can do that in the next couple swings. Like if they're just hitting constant ground balls and you're like, hey, I just point to this part of the cage, like aim right here. They're the younger kids are like, oh, okay. And then they usually just can do it pretty quick. But like when you get to we had a winter hitting camp or a season, if you will, not a camp. And there was one of the older kids there. He's like 15. His swing was so straight down,
Yep.
and it was
Yeah.
like, hey, hit, you got to hit the ball in the air. Hey, hit the ball in the air. Couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Couldn't do it. Couldn't change. Like it's younger kids are almost easier to work with because, like you talked about, just giving them a goal of, hey, we're not gonna hit the puppies, but in doing that, you have to swing like Happy Gilmore, or you have to take a step back, or we have the Kershaw drill, so we lift our leg up way high. Any of that. I mean, I think it's great. And I'm sure you guys go deep into that into the book.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the bungee stuff or like the connection balls, but it's only because I just have some concerns about how that modality of training works when you don't have the kid, strapped in. But the thing I think it's 1,000% valid is that like you actually want to expose the flaw and lean into that, right? So if you're able to do that with the bungees, man, yeah, absolutely. Because if you think about kids who are like leaking out front, a lot of that probably has to do with both sequence and also their ability to like effectively block on the lead leg. Um, if they don't know how to block on the lead leg, well, how are they going to learn that? Right? Am I if I'm pulling them back, I'm not exposing the flaw that's preventing them from doing that. I'm papering over it a little bit,
Hmm.
right? So for that kid, it's like, yeah, you really need to do something that is going to address that flaw that might have a lot to do with like the physiological side of things, and it has to do with the skill, right? Again, for us on the academy side, the reason that we spend somewhere between like 45 minutes to an hour doing something in our high performance area, which is basically like our strength and athleticism, is because a lot of these kids, a lot of the flaws that kids display in the skill is much more because of whatever like holistic athletic deficiency they have rather than like a mechanical deficiency in the swing, right? Like if you can't effectively brace and squat your own body weight, I, I have some pretty significant doubts about your ability to do that in a swing. If
Hmm.
you can't squat your own body weight with a little bit of like additional load, then you for sure are probably not going to be able to do that in your swing. And if we want to resolve that deficiency, we have to attack it on both sides. You want to expose and lean into that flaw, both in the skill. And then when you get that kid an opportunity, like, yeah, let's do some kettlebell squats, or let's play a game that's going to force us to be able to like brace and keep our weight back, right? Because you can do that. You can do both of those things. And I honestly don't think if you don't address it both on the athletic and again the physiological side, you're probably never going to solve it entirely on the skill side either. Like it has to be both.
So I've got a kid. He's made the C team or the B team. What's next?
I
What?
think yeah,
How do you? Let's pair these two together. Picking the right travel org, and in that org, let's say I've made a team lower than what I thought I should have, or
sure,
lower than I wanted. I'll give you the
sure,
floor.
sure. I think the picking the team thing, starts with having some open and honest communications with either the coach or the organization about their goals for your kid. And I think if they can't answer those questions and also show you the plan about how they're going to go about achieving those goals, I would be pretty suspect about how likely they are to actually do those things, right? And I think that pairs with this conversation about like I'm not as good as I want to be right now. Okay, fine. Everybody's going to be different. It's youth baseball, man. Everybody's got something to work on.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think the first step in kind of like assessing that conversation like starts with an actual assessment. Like you got to figure out why. Um, and that means, I think, data can help. Data can help a lot to kind of just see with clear eyes, like why am I not as good as I could be, right? I think for us, again, the idea that we call it skills at scale is because we put a little bit more of our chips on the table on the side of hitting and throwing because that's what all the action revolves around. That doesn't mean that I'm trying to turn youth baseball into like a carnival version of the game. That doesn't mean we don't need to teach competitive players, but I think we just need to have again a little bit more of our time and energy reflected on the two most significant carrying tools you could ever possibly have. Can you hit and can you throw? Like that's the biggest thing. So you got to kind of assess where those things are. Nowadays, I think technology has gotten cheaper and cheaper to allow people to be able to do that. So whether it's, I mean, if you've got a pocket radar, and you can figure out where your thrown ball velocity is right now, great. Those old Bushnell radar guns that I think all of us used at one point in life or another, that are like plus minus 5 to 7 miles an hour. Hey man, that's fine too. If your testing environment on day one is the same as it is on week 6,
Hmm.
okay, fine, we can accept that variance. It's very much like this broken ruler theory, right? If my broken ruler is broken all the time, then at least it's accurate up until the point that it breaks. Um, Things like blast sensors, the diamond kinetic sensors are very, 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 very cheap nowadays.
Hmm.
Look, I just had to buy a new bat for my son because he hits a lot and he's hit so much in the last year that the bat's now dead. That happens. New bat cost me $350. And I didn't even get the most expensive one, right? Like I didn't go out and get him like the $450 goods, right? The diamond kinetic sensors, the blast motion sensors, man, you can get those for somewhere between like 75, 100, $125 nowadays.
Hmm.
Um, and if you are trying to, again, you got assigned to like the C team and you are trying to understand why, well, like if you can't move the bat faster than like 45 miles an hour, okay, well that look, bat speed is the most significant ingredient in the equation of hitting a ball hard and far. What they told us back in the day was that the pitcher supplied the power. Um, they
Like
lied to us.
0.008%.
Yeah, I mean they lied to us thanks to the work of Dr. Alan Nathan at the University of Illinois. That we just fundamentally know that that's not true.
Hmm.
You got to move the bat fast to hit the ball hard. Moving the bat fast is good. Hitting the ball hard is good. Um, so you can assess these things, right? And basically the core of the idea is simply just trying to find some data inputs that give us an unbiased perspective about where your performance is right now.
That Ray or gun
Hey,
don't lie, man.
right, like you you're a high school freshman, right? Let's say you're a high school freshman, okay? And you can't throw the ball 70 and you can't move the bat faster than 60. Okay. We could do the same thing on like testing your competence on ground balls. Like, hey, I'm going to give you 3 rounds of eight grounders. I'm going to go 3 up the middle, 3 backside, 3 glove side, right? Okay, well, what did we score? Okay, well, let's do that again next week. Let's do that again next week. Let's do that again next week. If you take the time to assess these things, it's going to give you a really clear picture of what you need to improve. And then it's just again this choose your own adventure game of like how do you go about improving them? Things like bat speed. Look, the best thing about getting a low number on bat speed is that bat speed is something you can improve. It's just proven to death in research that bat speed training works. It's
Hmm.
going to help you move the bat faster. If you just are smart at executing a program, we have those at Driveline there in the book. Do you need to throw the ball harder? Okay, cool. We can do that. We have tools that help you do that. Throwing is a little bit more complex because, again, we need to have a period of time that we can solely develop on the throwing side where we're not trying to play games, which then I think raises some questions that you can ask your org. Are we playing fall ball? Are we playing winter ball? Like, what does that look like? Because if all you're doing in those periods of time is playing games, then you literally don't have time to develop the skill, right? We don't want to put this kids in configuration where they are burning the candle at both ends and the middle,
Hmm.
right? You want to have a specific phase of the year where you can actually develop the skill that you're going to deploy in the game. So when you start to talk about, travel orgs and picking the right one for your son or daughter, I think asking questions about goals, I think asking questions about schedule is going to tell you everything you need to know about how they're able to develop your kid. Because if they say, okay, yeah, we're huge on development, right? Like we have some orgs in our local area that have basically stolen a bunch of the verbiage that I use to describe our teams. It's cool, no big deal. Um, and then we're all about development here at the such and such academy. We really want to develop all our kids. And I say, okay, cool. Like how are you going to do that? Well, we're going to start. We play in fall ball as soon as summer season's over. playing some winter ball. I'll have a couple practices, and then we're just rolling right into the spring. Where's the time for development, right? Like how, right? You're trying to pull blood from a stone, man. You don't have time to have a specific developmental phase because of the behavior and the schedule that you're executing. Doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with that. It just means you can't do both, and you shouldn't do both because you can't do them both safely. So I think for me, the answer to both of those things, both of those questions, is all wrapped up in the same thing. You have to talk to these organizations about goals for your athlete. How do they assess what your kid needs, and how are they going to go about delivering it? And then what does the schedule look like? Because the schedule is going to inform whether or not they're just blowing smoke about actually trying to develop your kid. Because if you're going to play 70, 80, 90 games, there's no meat on the bone, man. Like
Right.
you really can't.
There's got to be a happy medium between both.
Well, there is, and you can look at things like USA Baseball. I know some of the guys over there. Andrew Bartman is just such a dude who is just as passionate about this stuff as I am. They have, as you go to USA Baseball LTAD, or what's USA Base LTAD. Anyways, if you Google USA Baseball LTAD,
Hmm.
you can see their perspective, their long-term athletic development model about where USA Baseball, very, very smart men and women over there, smarter than me, are kind of defining what each age should look like, right? What are the goals? How many games should be playing? What's the curriculum? You can pair that with the resource they have over at PitchSmart to kind of define the behavior within those years. One of the things that you will see is, I'm pretty sure from 14U on down, they want the split between practice and competition to be like 70% practice, 30% competition. How many youth teams, 14U on down, actually look like that? I don't think that there are many. And again, the reason is because it's tougher to communicate value of that, right? Um, it's a little bit more of a complicated thing to explain to a parent. Hey, I want to develop your kid's bat speed and their throwing velocity and their exit velocity and their athletic performance, right? It's a little bit more complicated to explain that. The simple thing to communicate is, I want to win, right? It's the simplest possible thing you can communicate to a parent, which is just that, like, we want to win a bunch of ball games. And and certainly when you play all those games, you are developing something. You're developing your skill within the game,
Hmm.
but you don't have time to do both. It's like in drag racing, it's like it's a run what you brung race, right? I'm going to show up to the track with the car that I drove there. I'm going to bang it down the quarter, and like, it is what it is. That's a run what you brung. Um, I think what youth baseball should look like is more like Top Fuel, right? We're gonna make a run, and then we're gonna rebuild the entire flipping engine. Like, we're
Hmm.
take everything down to the bolts, and we are gonna change some stuff. Then we're gonna run it again. I think all too often we end up in this kind of run what you brung space, and then you are that parent who their kid gets cut from the freshman baseball team, or you are 17 years old and you're throwing like 74 and you're getting outs in your local area, but you don't understand why college coaches don't want to talk to you.
Well, it's
They
the
don't want to
next.
talk to
Is
you.
he's the next Greg Maddox? Like,
Yeah. And that's the tricky thing, right? Is it like the signal that you get from all these games at the youth level, and sometimes even in the high school level, depending on where you are, kids can be getting the results they want in the game, but they're not developing the skill that they need later.
they're not killing the puppies.
Yeah, and that's a really tricky thing that I have a lot of empathy for parents who, again, just like don't have the information to understand what your child needs to be successful later, right? We understand this academically. I need my kid to have like a good foundational
Yep.
understanding of, for addition, subtraction, division, multiplication for any higher level math. I think a lot of times the perspective is like, and I need that foundation in order to understand like statistics and trigonometry or calculus or whatever. Not a big math guy. I hated math in high school, so I'm probably the worst person to give this analogy. But um, it's like your kid struggles with like core multiplication and division, and you're like, you don't understand why he or she isn't getting accepted into like this this college level calculus course. They don't have the core requirement met yet.
Hmm. I mean, it's the hardest part is like I do the recruiting for our org. Is like there's so many kids that have had success all the way from, you know, 10 years old to 16, and then it's like, where do you see him fitting? Like, he's got 2 ERA, so I got the walk as this, and it's like
Yep.
I come watch the kid, and it's the first time they've been. Well, I mean, they play perfect game tournaments, so I probably know what they're gonna be. But like, I'll do my thing where I come watch them and put them on video, and it's like I've got him at 76. Well, where do you think you could play? Like, you think like they'll pick like the best Division 2 in the area that everyone knows it. It's like, well, if we're not gonna go play D1, like this Division 2, and it's like that Division 2's weekend guys aren't throwing under 92 miles an hour.
Right. Right.
And then it's like, well, those kids probably don't know where it's going. I'm like, no, those kids know where it's going.
Right.
It's not finding a barrel.
Yeah, and even if they don't know where it's going, when you're in the nines, there's a coach somewhere who's probably likely to try to solve that problem, and they're more interested in trying to solve that kid's problem than they are the kid who's at 76.
Mm-hmm.
That kid is not within a range of like, hey, we can. I feel really really confident about somebody in that box probably being able to add a decent amount of velocity in like a 12-month period, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
they probably have a lot of low hanging fruit that you could attack.
82
Uh,
miles an hour.
82 is yeah. I mean, you can get it better, but again,
Well, that's what I'm
you're
saying. It's you go from 76 to 82 probably by getting in a college, weightlifting program, because you
sure.
probably not lifted
Yep.
weights consistently,
Yep.
even though you're the hardest working kid at school, and
Yep.
a consistent throwing program. You probably can go from like 76 to 82. Guys that are like 84, 85, they usually go like 86, 87, and it's a matter of how their body's working and all that if they're going to jump up. Like when I was at Division 3, it was like you had to try and recruit kids that were 88, and then we just recruit kids that couldn't throw strikes, didn't know where it was going. And it's like, why am I doing this? Why don't I just recruit the kids that are 82 to 84 that throw 3 pitches for strikes, because we know they're going to come and they're going to gain a couple miles an hour and they're going to get there. But there was a threshold to which, and that's Division 3 high academic. There's a threshold to which I'm not recruiting 73 because he can throw strikes and 3 pitches. Like, there is absolutely a threshold, like what your bottom is.
And that's 73. That kid at 73 in high school might be getting outs, right? Like they might be carving.
Yeah.
Uh, so I understand,
Y-
that like this dilemma of you're seeing your kid's performance in this one specific environment, like, well, why can't they continue to get there? Because the pool gets a lot smaller.
Yeah.
Hit the college level, even like an academic D3, man, you take this pool of like what is it?
Some of those schools are nasty.
Dude, yeah, and like you're taking just think about like the numbers of it, right? You've got somewhere around what is it, 2 million high school players every year that are trying to go on to college.
This is my hill that I die on when people say there's a place for everybody to play, and I'm like, no, there's not. There's just
It's,
not. Like, let's just do the numbers. There's not. Aside from all the reasons where you're not good enough, you don't care enough, you don't love it enough, you want to party too much,
yep.
any of that. There's just not enough. Stop. I hate that. I hate that when people say, "Well, there's a place for someone to play," and then usually it goes like, "Well, if they're somewhat good enough,
Yeah,
like you can go play in the middle of nowhere, North Dakota." Like, yeah, sure, of course, but like, there's not a place for everybody to play because the game is the game, and it's gonna give you up at some point, regardless if you're, Deven Morgan, Mike Shepard, or Mike Trout. Like, at some point, someone's gonna say, you're really not good enough to be on the team anymore. And maybe it's like you're actually good enough, but your baggage is too much. Your
sure.
parents are ridiculous in the stands and whatever. Or maybe it's like, you know, Mike Trout's the best teammate in the world, so he's going to keep getting contracts even though he's performing below them because who is the backup quarterback of the Saints that forever. He was a back quarterback in the league for like 25 years and hadn't thrown a
Mark
pass for
Brunell.
like hadn't
Was it
thrown a
Mark
pass.
Brunell?
No, it was
No.
it might have been one of the McCowns.
Oh, sure.
But
Yeah.
it was like he is a professional. He is coming in and helping. The game has given him up skill wise a long time ago, but he is a good dude and he's doing all the things right.
Still adding value.
Yeah, but at some point, you know, the game is going to give you up. And
Yep.
if you're 76 and you're the greatest person in the world and you got a 4.0 and your parents look athletic and maybe that gets you a shot in the door. But if you're 76 and you're just a raging jerk, it's not happening. But at some point, the game's going to give us all up. Not a
Yeah.
place for everybody to play.
Yeah. And I think the other side of that I really love is like, it just takes one coach. Like, there's only one coach that's got to see him. And like, yeah, but if your stuff was better, you'd have 500 coaches that want to see him or 5,000,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that's the thing. We have access to all this information nowadays. The word on the street is there's like a local JUCO around here, where we are in the Northwest that just like wasn't looking at kids if they didn't throw 85 or better. And that's an NWAC junior college in the Pacific Northwest. If that's their perspective, then what does that tell you? It means that they have enough guys that they can filter 85 up that are still looking to play, that those guys 85 down, man, or 84 or less, it's just like it's not worth it to them. It's just a numbers game. With things like flat ground, with things like field level nowadays, in all of like the scouting, the showcase stuff, I mean, there's enough kids that they can select from that kind of fit their criteria. And I think
Yep.
the thing that really hurts my heart about this is you have parents sending kids to showcases at like 12,
Hmm.
13, 14, 18, and they if they just open their eyes, the information is really clear about what opportunities are really going to, what kids are getting these type of shots. And if you see that, then you could spend your time developing some of the attributes that these kids are looking for, or that these coaches are looking for, right? They want kids that have the numbers that they need, and they need kids that can play the game. It's really simple. You got to be able to do both.
Right.
Um, and if we're spending our time in service of developing those attributes appropriately, then I think you have the opportunity to at least put a kid in a position for long-term success that should be much more their role and responsibility at finding than mine as the parent, which again is like, kind of comes back to like the first question that we were talking about, which is like that tweet, right? Care more about the former, less about the latter. Like the rest is out of your hands.
Mm-hmm.
My kid's 15. How far he goes in this game at this point is not going to be based on my decisions and my choices. It's going to be on his. I cannot.
Your genetics a little bit,
I wish. Like I tell people that like, my wife and I are not going to make tall people. We're going to make sturdy people with hips and shoulders. I don't have the next,
same, man.
yeah, like the next Aaron Judge is not coming out of my household.
No, but you're absolutely right.
It, it's on him, and there's a period of time when you're parenting in this game where you are kind of in the driver's seat, which I think is why it's so important that parents who coach from this perspective of like positivity and effort over outcome and helping kids stay engaged with the game. You have to help them. If they love it and they don't really understand why, it's your job to keep them loving it. And you're going to have to keep them loving it through adversity that is literally inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
But at a certain point, you do hand the car keys over to them, man. Like, and it should be theirs,
Oh,
right?
it's just like you've spent 18 years raising a kid. You could do everything right, and the kid is great for those 18 years. Well, then they go off to college, and it's like people always understand. Like, I don't understand. Like, his parents are so great.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's the kid's decision on how far he goes in baseball, how far he goes in academics. Like, and you can give him all the tools to be successful, and you can pay all the hundreds of dollars for lessons. But at the end of the day, it's going to be the kid's genetic makeup, what they have internally. And you could try to make the competitive gene better. You could try to keep the love of the game better, but ultimately it's going to fall on the kid
Correct.
at some point. And that
Correct.
goes
It
for more than just
should.
like we talk about so many. This is the life lesson podcast. Like it goes more than just baseball. It's school. It's the decisions when they go to college, and it's like to give up the keys when we're drinking. Like all of those things are out of your control, even if you've done everything right. And I think parents doing the right things, like up that percentage that they'll give away their car keys when they're supposed to, or they'll get out of bed and go work to get better at baseball. Like you can push it by a few percentages here and there, but you know, if we're referencing it to
But
baseball, if a kid's throwing 76, you can't make him throw 96 out of nowhere. No matter who
yeah, I
you're,
mean,
no, Richard Simmons or the Rock can't train that kid to throw 96. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, yeah,
and that's unfortunately that's just the way the world is, and it sucks. It sucks when your kid isn't, like we talked about, your kid's not good enough, because that's hard. Because as a parent, I'm sure you have unconditional love for them, and you want nothing but the best. And someone telling your kid they're not good enough, I imagine, is just you feel pain for your
yep.
kid,
Of course,
and that's
of course.
horrible. But some parents don't take it well, and I think sometimes coaches do get upset. But we need to realize, like, we're human. That parent is
Yeah,
human. If their kid just got cut or told they're not on the team they want to be on, have a little empathy. But
yeah. It sucks, but I think a lot of this, again, what systems and what signals do our children internalize from the way that we respond to that stuff? Like if my kid, um, if my kid is told by an organization that he isn't good enough to continue to play for them, and I react to that emotionally, and I act like, well, he's been wronged, and this isn't fair, and like,
yep,
okay, that's one way that you can respond to that. The other way that you can respond to that is just like accept it, and accept the signal that you're being given and try to figure out what type of action you're going to take from it. And again, that's a life thing, man. That's not a baseball thing.
yeah,
Like I don't know, I we're less than 2 weeks away from my son's high school baseball tryout, and it's it's the one thing that I know is challenging for me is that this is the first time that he's going to play for a coach that isn't either me or a coach that I've literally handpicked for him.
right.
You know, I have I have played concierge for this whole experience.
He needs
Um,
he needs this though.
exactly. And that's the thing, is that like at a certain point, I have to expose him to the reality of what the rest of this thing looks like. And the only thing that I hope is that I've imparted enough perspective and context and sending signal about positive behavior that he will respond as best he can. And if the worst thing that can happen is that he says, well, Dad, I don't want to play baseball anymore. I, I want to be a rocket scientist. Great. That's wonderful. Let's follow this new passion that you have with some of the tools of perspective that we've gotten from this game. Like how
Right.
it's, but I think when you have again younger parents, that end up being at the driver's seat of a lot of this stuff, yeah, it's hard to blame these kids if they impart that like this is just as much mom and dad's journey as it is mine. And like, man, I don't want that. I want my kids to make an active an active choice about the things that they want to do for them. I do not want them doing this as if they think it is in some way, shape, or form service to me in our relationship. Because again, like we talked about at the beginning of this thing, I'm going to be their parent for a hell of a longer time than I'm going to be their coach. I'm going to be their parent for a hell of a lot time longer than when I get a chance to watch them with a cap and a belt on a field.
You gotta stop saying that. You're gonna make me get all choked up again.
Sorry.
Well, I mean, no, I'm just kidding. I mean, uh, uh, he's gonna come home to you and with this new coach, and
Yep.
I don't know who the new coach is, and that new coach is gonna change something, or he's gonna run something differently than you or your other coaches have, and that's just another opportunity for you because now he's older, so he understands the world. He understands the world more than when he did before, right? So like, he's gonna come home and be like, "Dad, we did this," and it's in your head. You may be like, "What the hell?" But
Right.
how you react to him when he's 15 is gonna lay even more of a groundwork to him in his future because now he's more developed in his brain and he understands why. And I don't want to say you guys have to be on your A game, but like as a parent, you're constantly like, you know, all the groundwork that you laid can just if you come home and you're like that guy's a flaming idiot, like don't listen to anything he says, like it's like
Right.
you just ruin that foundation. So it's like you always have to be on your A game. It's like, all right, how do I want to approach this? Because I know that ain't the way you run a wheel pick play. That's awful. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
Like it's really hard, but he for his development, he needs some of those situations like more more so than he needs this coach to be perfect.
Right.
There's got to
Right.
be a conversation over a hot fudge sundae that's like, I don't know why we did this, Dad. And you impart some wisdom and you say, hey, look, like, that's not the way I would do it, but like, there's a bunch of different ways. But if you want to be a leader on this team, then, and you want your teammates to look at you and say, that guy's the leader or whatnot, like, you have to be in line with the coaches in some way. You know what I mean? There's so many different avenues in which you could go, and I don't have to tell you you've been a dad a lot longer than I have, but being around the game, like we all recognize that.
Yeah. I mean, now talking about teams, man, you gotta have everybody pulling the chain in the same direction.
And
Like
that's the
that.
lesson you give if he stinks as a coach.
Yeah, that's the only way that you make progress. And we've had these conversations about what it looks like to kind of like yes, coach, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, coach, right? Um, the only thing that the only thing that I'm like really concerned about is just making sure that he stays healthy. Um, that's really the only thing. But I'm not. But I'm literally having conversations with my son about like I need you to advocate for yourself because I don't really want your high school coach to even know who I am, right?
Yeah. Teach him how,
The,
like, hey, you don't agree with this? This is this is how you go about it.
yep,
And you know, you're gonna teach him the right way to approach a coach because I imagine you don't get to be your role without knowing the way to do that. And he's gonna go approach his coach and his coach is gonna handle it how does he handle it, and then he's gonna come back to you, and then you're gonna say, well, that's the best way that someone could handle it. Or you could say, son, when you get to run your own business or your own team one day, that's not the way we want to handle things. And it's
correct,
just
correct.
it's always a learning and teaching moment and
Yep,
opportunity.
yep. But like again, I think the thing that I worry about in youth baseball is that like when you see like the kids that are club hopping, it's like from one to the other to the other to the other to the other. Like there was a clip that was flying around on social media last summer of some goofy youth baseball stuff, and I don't even remember what the situation was, but I ended up looking up the profile of one of the kids on that team, and the kid had been on 24 teams in like 4 years.
His mom's probably crazy or dad, whatever. Actually,
Yeah,
what mark is this? 203. I was just take it out right now. I'm just gonna. that won't be going in there because I don't want to get any shit for saying just his mom's crazy. Anyways, the kid was on 24 teams.
Yeah, so 24 teams over the course of like 4 years. I have some concerns about the signal we're sending to that kid about how to deal with adversity.
Yep.
Because certainly I think from afar, I don't know the entire situation, but I can presume that somebody feels like they're not getting the thing that they want, right?
24 coaches don't have it out for that kid. I can promise you that.
Right. And I have a hard time believing that 24 coaches, that all of them are, complete D-bags. Um, somebody, but all of them were consistent in the fact that they didn't give this parent or this child exactly what they wanted. And to what degree is that child not getting the signal that they might need to work a little bit more to get the thing that they wanted?
Or they should pick something different.
Well, yeah, or maybe this thing isn't for you.
Baseball has given him up before it's given Mike Trout up at that point in
Yeah,
life.
and
Like,
and again, if you give a kid runway to say like, hey, I want you to find the thing that you're passionate about, the thing that you're really compelled to do, and the thing that's a good fit for your skills and innate abilities. Um, Again, there's any number of places that I can play. If it's just like, well, you're gonna be a ball player, and we're gonna go through 24 different organizations until we find the right fit, like we're getting a lot of signal about how effective this strategy is, and we're not really listening to any of it.
right. What's the right fit? Making you better or just giving you what you want?
Yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, we probably could do this once a week for 3 hours a day and still not touch on everything with youth
Yeah, there's a
baseball.
lot.
But we got one of our coaches for our 16 and 17 U teams. He's older than I am. He gives me shit all the time when these podcasts are. When I first started, they were usually like an hour, hour and 10, and then a couple of them got up there, and he was like, "How long are these podcasts supposed? Like, what's the normal 20 or 30 minute?" I'm like, "Ken, I listen to a ton of podcasts, and I've never listened to a podcast that was under an hour or under 45 minutes. Most are like an hour and a half. Like, whether that be sports, gambling, true
Sure.
crime." And I was like, "You got to listen in 1.5 speed." Or I was like, "Well,
That's a
I
hack.
I listen in 1.5 speed. I cannot listen to myself in 1.5 speed. I have to listen to myself in 1.25. I think I talk too fast. But like I told him, I was like, you gotta just you gotta cut this thing down. But um I ended each one with we're the ATL Lightning, so we got a really cheesy thing. We call it the lightning round. Um
Wait.
so it's as cheesy as in that opening overlay I have, we call it the rundown.
Okay.
Lightning round, just questions that don't mean anything. No,
Okay.
no,
Get into
no,
it.
no rhyme or reason. Is a hot dog a sandwich?
Hot dog is not a sandwich
Who's your
if the
favorite?
bun is connected.
Hot dog is not a sandwich if the bun is connected. That's technical.
Well,
No, you're right. No, no, no. You are by. I agree.
yeah.
Well, I don't agree, but I
You,
get.
you understand what I'm
I
saying?
can't call a hot dog a sandwich, but it technically it is. Who's your favorite
Sure.
baseball player?
Of all time.
However you want to answer it. Give me both if you want.
Uh, my favorite player when I was a kid was Gary Carter. Um,
Not
my
not like Griffey or Randy Johnson.
I was a catcher, man. Gary
Yeah,
Carter was my guy
it's
because
fair.
Gary Carter was a catcher who could bang. Like he could hit a little bit, and that's what I wanted to be when I grew up. I was not good enough as a baseball player, so I didn't get to that place. But Gary Carter is my guy. I think my favorite player as an adult is definitely Yasiel Puig, and only just because when Puig came up with the Dodgers. We're a Dodger family. My
Okay.
grandfather was a Dodger guy, so like I just grew up. The Dodgers are always my NL team because I'm in Seattle. The Mariners are my AL team.
Mm-hmm.
Before there was interleague, neither two shall meet. Right. The only thing I had to worry about was like, well, what happened if the Mariners and the Dodgers play themselves in the World
Neither
Series?
two
I
still
think,
won't meet.
yeah. Um. So when Puig came up as a Dodger, it was the end of the Vince Scully era. So like we didn't miss a game, and I got a chance to see how seeing that guy play the game with that much joy when he first came up, how that affected my children.
Hmm.
And I think that is just something that I don't know what it was I don't know what it was like when I was a kid, when I was like, whether it was Gary Carter or Kirk Gibson or Spike Owen or Ken Griffey Jr. Like I loved watching those guys, but I don't know what it looked like for my parents and my grandparents to watch me watching those guys. I
It's
know what it
different
was
for you.
like. Yeah, I know what it was like definitively to see my son and daughter watch Puig and just the joy that permeated the way that he played the game and how it affected them and how they, I think, came to love baseball because they saw somebody that had that much fun playing. So yeah, Puig, I think, is definitely my favorite as an adult.
You put pineapple on pizza?
I do.
Good answer.
Big Hawaiian.
Oh yeah. What? How did the? I worked at a pizza place for a while, so my definition for Hawaiian is different than a lot of people. Like, what do you put on your Hawaiian? You
I
order a
mean,
Hawaiian pizza. What do you expect to get on it?
Canadian bacon and pineapple, and and if there's some jalapenos on there, I'm also happy.
See, mine is ham, bacon, and pineapple. So
Oh,
the
sure.
bacon goes on. For me, it's not a Hawaiian without bacon and ham, but
Gotcha.
I know it's different. But pineapple mainstay on pizza. You know, also good is just pepperoni, just straight pepperoni pineapple. It's great.
Yeah, for sure.
It's amazing. Are you pro or anti shift?
Um, I am pro shift because I think defenders should be allowed to play the game the way that they want to play. And I think these like arbitrary, like you can stand here, but you can't stand here. I think that's just BS. I'm out on the pitch clock. I'm out on banning the shift. I think the game is the game. And especially because the only thing that this is relevant for is the highest level of the game. Um, I think it should be allowed to shift and modify the way that it is. Like right now, guys throw really hard. And there was a period of time where I think hitters just kind of like did the same thing that shooters did in the NBA. They realized that three is more than two. We kind of realized that like homers are good and hitting the ball hard is good. Uh, and they might have sold out a little bit for that approach. What I want to see the game do is do what it's always done, which is like the natural snap back, and if what we need to do, because guys throw so hard and they throw such nasty stuff nowadays, and there are less and less fastballs being thrown, okay, if we need to generate more contact hitters, then I want to see the game adapt that way. I don't want to see these kind of like artificial limits change on like, well, you can't play it this way. No,
Mm-hmm.
man, let the game be the game.
Pitching to or offensive clinic?
Ooh, offensive clinic. I love hitting. Like
It,
I want to see guys bang.
you have any pregame superstitions?
I don't cross. I don't cross. If I'm going to coach a bag, I do not step on the field, and I will go all the way around home plate. I don't walk through the box. I don't step over the lines, and it really weirds me out when I see coaches that are like they're going out from like their third base dugout and going to the first base, and they like walk over home plate or they walk through the batter's box. It's like, bro, that is so low feel. Like you can't do that.
I've never thought about that. I've never ever done that. I've never crossed the field, but I've never thought of it like, oh, I don't cross the field. But now that I think about it, I always run all the way because
You go around.
my fiance makes fun of me with this little shuffle I do when I first come out of the dugout, and
Sure.
it's like a side shuffle hop thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's what I seen my high school coach do forever, and that's what I do now. And I'm always going like behind home plate. Like I don't think I've ever. The only time I've ever crossed the line is to go make a pitching mound visit.
Correct. And again, because I'm around an inordinate amount of youth baseball, you see a lot of guys, so there's a lot
Oh
of
yeah,
variability in the way that they act,
great.
and like anytime,
Like third base to first base. That's what route they're taking.
oh, it's like, bro, you can't do that. Don't do that. So I think that's really the only superstition that I have is like if I'm gonna get out, into the first or third to coach from, I do not step through the lines.
Um, Big Green Monster or Chicago Ivy?
Ivy. I'm going Ivy.
What's your favorite sunflower seed flavor?
Pickle. Big pickle guy nowadays.
Like my
Now
mom.
that they're
Like
making
my
a pickle
mom.
flavored sunflower seeds, yeah.
What about Gatorade flavor?
I mean, I'm really old, so orange. Like, like all this other like the stuff that's like toothpaste colored nowadays. I mean,
Nah.
I think it tastes terrible, but like, the OG orange Gatorade is
I,
my jam.
I can't even I can't even drink regular Gatorade now. It's always like G2, but like the
Yeah.
blue, purple. I don't even
Okay.
use the name. Just it's the
Yeah.
color.
Yeah, it's just color.
Orange G2, purple G2, whatever. But I don't drink pop anymore either. Like once a year, whenever I go to Costco and get $1.50 hot dog, I'll get a
Yeah.
Mountain Dew. But that's
Sure.
that's it. But then my stomach is upset because it's too much sugar. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, we've fully transitioned to like the Coke Zeros in my house. So,
God, Adam Sandler or Vince Vaughn?
oh man, that's uh Vince Vaughn, just because of Wedding Crashers.
Man, that's my favorite movie, and that's my favorite. Vince. Nobody answers Vince Vaughn, but that's mine because I think I just watched so many the breakup and Wedding Crashers so many times in my life
Yeah,
that it's just. But you're the first one to ever to answer Vince Vaughn. Everyone else has answered Adam Sandler. So
yeah. I mean, and especially like Swingers and like the cameos and Anchorman and stuff. Yeah, I'm going Vince Vaughn.
yeah, both are good, right? Like I mean,
Yeah, yeah, of
you're
course.
choosing. I mean, I didn't give you like some no name actor for Vince Vaughn. You got to go. You know,
Yeah, I mean, if there was a third option, I would probably go Will Ferrell above both. But that's a different one.
Will Ferrell is like very, very, very hit or miss with me. Like,
Yeah,
and I know I'm in the minority, and I couldn't tell you why, but to each his own.
sure.
But Devin, dude, this is awesome. Thank you very much. I
Yeah, of
appreciate you.
course.
I appreciate you coming on, and hopefully, I did okay as a host. I know you've hosted a lot more podcasts than I
Dude, you're
have,
great.
so
Great.
it's always interesting when you especially when you're first starting out. You send your buddies that love you. They'll you tell them to listen, and they'll listen for you, and
Yeah.
they give you feedback, and it's so interesting how people pick like one person gets one thing from the podcast and another person gets something totally different, and it's like, how did you guys listen to the same podcast and these are your it's not like an English teacher grading a book where it's just right or wrong. It's like, you know some people are like, that was the best podcast ever, and I was like, because of the guests, because of the convo, because of me. I'm like, what do what do you got for me? You hear, stop putting a dip in when they're talking, stop cussing or this, that, and the other. So I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, man. We kept it pretty clean, right? We
We
kept it
kept it
clean.
clean. I only put one dip in, and it was the very end there. I think, we bounced around on topics, but again, I'm okay with that because I firmly believe with your experience, remembering why we do this and at its core is more important than the metrics of an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old,
100%.
or a 16-year-old, right? Like Kyle Farmer came on a couple weeks ago and he said, you have to love baseball if you want to make it far, because if you do not love the game, you will not reach your maximum potential. And if you have a parent or a coach or anybody in that kid's life that is sucking the fun out of the game, it will minimize where they're going to go. So I touching that stuff is, in my opinion, more important than everything else. And people should go buy your book because I've seen some excerpts and I can't wait to read it. Because if you can master keeping the game fun for kids, well, once we've done that, now we need to figure out, how do we maximize practice time? How do we
Yep.
maximize all of these things?
Yeah. I mean, we've tried to put, everything that I've got and everything that I learned over, 14 years of doing this, which, when I think about saying that compared to, guys I know, like, Pudge Gorman is a high school baseball coach in the Virginia area. Pudge has been coaching for 26 years, and like, man, my 14 compared to his is just like it's inconsequential, but we have everything that's in the book is designed to try to give you everything that I possibly can about how to do this in the best way possible. And I do agree that fun is the most important ingredient, man. I think I think kids' love of baseball is a very precious, but it can be a very fragile thing.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and that's the when I do get those the comments from like the Hardo 8U intentional walk coaches, um, like I get it, because I think the thing that they're really sensitive to is the danger that that loss might present to, it's bad if you're worried about the danger that that imparts to your own sense of self as like a fully formed adult, because get your shit together, man.
Right,
Like,
right.
but I'm really sensitive to the danger that losing can mean to a small child.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I will say, with the perspective that I have of a couple older kids, and I certainly, I've got a lot more to learn, and I'm certain that I will learn a lot over the course of these next 4 years. I can't tell you how many games my son won or lost over this whole time. I don't think he could too. What I do know is that I think he loves this game just as much as he did when he was like, you know, barely standing in his diaper, taking swings when my wife was like soft tossing to him while I was at work. And and throughout it all, we tried to do a good job of both. Like, if we're going to be on a field, let's try to win a ball game. But I'm not going to do that in a way that, again, mitigates or minimizes learning opportunities along the way. And when we do lose, I'm not going to stigmatize a child for being a child, whether that resulted in them making a mistake on the field or having bad mechanics or etc. Man, shark's going to be a shark. Like, you gotta understand the thing that is that they are just innately, children are not small adults. I think sometimes you put a cap and a belt on them and we think it's the other way around, and it's just not. So throughout this whole journey, we got him to this point, man. And like, I know that there are dudes that when I started posting clips of my kids training, years and years ago, I mean, I have a screenshot on my phone of some dude who's like, this kid's going to be washed up by high school. It's like, well, actually turns out, no, he's 15, he throws 85, he hits balls 90. So like, we're in a pretty okay place.
Yeah.
Where it goes from here, where it goes from here, man, it's on him. It's on him. And the only thing that I think I've been able to do successfully is I did not extinguish the love. Because that again is like, it's a very fragile thing, especially with all the options the kids have nowadays. So I think for people that might be interested in the book, man, yeah, I've got a ton of tools in there, a ton of the what and the why of what we do. But like, when my mom read the book, it's my mom, so caveat. But my mom was like, this book is just about how to love your children, and I was like, yeah, I'm okay. I'm okay with somebody having that be the takeaway,
Yeah.
because if you grow up and you love this game and you have the privilege of having children that want to play it, um, look, I want to get them as close to the truth of how good they can be as they possibly can. This is very much Driveline triple OG Casey Weathers. Hard work gives you honesty. Like, I want my kids to understand that as a principle of life, not necessarily of baseball. And then whenever they're done playing, I want to just feel really confident that I did the best job I possibly could to love them through the game and also outside of that the same way.
Yeah. Well, I think, obviously, I don't know your kids. I don't know you well enough, but from the perspective that you've given on today and the passion in which you've talked about, you've probably done a very good job of that. And your
Ryan,
kids,
man.
your kids will look back one day, and I didn't have all the data when I was younger growing up, but I can look back and say my parents, for having 4 kids by the time they were 26 years old, and us all, me being the oldest, us all I lied. It was 4 kids by the time they were 25. They
Yeah,
started when they were 17 every 2 years. Uh, they did a pretty good job. And I can look
yeah,
back on things where, I'm 12, my dad's 30. I'm 34 right now. And
yeah.
my dad he loves baseball and he's telling me go put your stuff in a trash can because you're done. I can say like they did a for all the faults and everything, like they did a pretty good job. And I think your kids will probably, when they get a little bit more perspective in life, they'll probably look back and be like, "Dad did a pretty good job." So
That's all you can ask for, man. That's literally
you
all.
can hang your hat on that, man, for sure.
Yeah,
So
that's all you can ask for.
all right, Devin, thank you so much. I
Absolutely.
will.
Have a good man.
Yep, you have a good one.